right, so good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be here. I appreciate the chance to deliver this presentation. Just a little bit of a background, as Brad said, I'm a teaching support specialist at Oklahoma State University. What I tell the in-laws at Christmas and Thanksgiving is that I work with a small team who helps faculty learn to be better teachers. And faculty come to OSU with a lot of them have background in research, but not necessarily a background in teaching. And so that's where we come in. And my particular angle on that is I deal a lot with the online teaching aspect of it. So I teach a class. We do that in a variety of ways. One of the ways that I've developed over the years is I teach a class called Preparing Online Instructors. And I do that 2 or 3 times a year. It's a class that I've built from the ground up. And in that class, faculty have to be online students. So they get the student experience that a lot of them have never had before. And they have assignments and due dates and discussion boards and all the tropes that you would see in an online class. Now faculty have to do that and get to experience what it's like to be online students. So that's always a big eye-opener for everyone. So as we're exploring what works in online education, faculty are also experiencing online education from a different point of view than they ever have before. In addition to that, I'm also a faculty member. So I teach at the Spear School of Business. I've taught a project management class there for, this is now, I'm wrapping up my 6th year. So I teach it in the fall and spring. I've got about 40 to 50 students a year. I actually teach that as kind of a, it's a flipped format. So it's not fully online, it's not fully face-to-face, it's like in the middle. A lot of success with that. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Today what we're going to be talking about is an introduction to online teaching. And just to give you a bit of an agenda here, there's 4 main things we'll talk about, and we'll get to as much as we can. And I guess let me delete this first bullet here. Before I get to any of the agenda, this presentation works best if it's more of a dialogue than a presentation. So I've got a lot of stuff, plenty of slides to fill the entire hour, but what I'm interested in is your opinion and your input. And so I'm curious about your questions. I'm curious about your experiences. If you have things that have worked for you that you want to share with the group, questions for me, questions for anyone else, these presentations, I get the most out of them, and I enjoy presenting them the most when it's more of a dialogue, a virtual dialogue, than just listening to me talk for a while. Second thing is, today's presentation is sponsored by Mountain Dew. So you may hear me pause every now and then for a sip of caffeinated encouragement there. With that being said, let's get to our agenda. 4 main things that we talk about today: developing an outcome-oriented mindset, LMS design, engaging students, and I'm going to close on what I call the 5 key components of online instruction. That's 5 things that I've kind of summarized from a lot of the literature and a lot of experience of teaching online. There's 5 things that work pretty well in any given online class, no matter who you are, no matter what subject you teach, no matter how big the class is. There's 5 things that are generally going to lift up the level of your class. I also want to preface this by saying nothing that we're going to talk about today is the one solution. I don't have the be-all, end-all, because everyone is different, every class is different. Even 2 instructors teaching the same class are going to teach that class online in 2 different ways. So I can't stand up here and say, well, here's the solution that works for all of you, because there is no such solution. But I can talk about some general trends, some general practices that are good things to think about, as well as some things that pretty much no matter what you teach are going to elevate the level of your class. Chris Anna in the chat room says, how do you feel the difference between corporate training and education using distance learning? It seems U.S. businesses and other countries have embraced distance learning more than we have. I don't have a lot of experience on the corporate training side of thing. I know this first one here, this first tip or bullet point, developing outcome-oriented mindset, that's going to apply across the board, regardless of whether you're in the corporate sector or the education sector. but I don't really have the authority or the expertise to speak in broad terms about trends in corporate training versus private or versus education, things like that. So I would leave that question to someone who's a little more qualified to answer it. And if someone is more qualified, please either message Chris Anna privately or chime in the chat. So the first thing I want to talk about, it's not the most exciting, but it's probably one of the most important things. It's an outcome-oriented mindset and developing that outcome-oriented mindset. And this regardless, this is across boundaries, no matter what subject you teach, no matter who you are, whether it's face-to-face, online, hybrid, it doesn't matter. An outcome-oriented mindset is kind of the key to, it's a starting point to successful instruction. What I mean by that is we need to make sure that anytime we teach, particularly online, we know exactly what our goals are for the course. And then we work backwards from there. It's the same as if we're going on a road trip. You know where you're going, and let's say you want to go to spring break in Pensacola, Florida. Well, you know you want to get to Pensacola, Florida, and you know that you've got a week and a condo. Beyond that, you have to work backwards from that main ending point. And so are you going to drive or fly? If you're going to drive, who's coming with you? What kind of car are you going to drive? Are you going to rent a car? Where are you going to stop? All those other decisions are made because of the end in mind. I once saw in Minnesota, on my way home, I had a half-hour commute every day when I lived up in Minneapolis. On my commute, there was this billboard for a Toyota Yaris. If any of you drive a Toyota Yaris, you know that it's not the biggest car in the world. Well, this billboard said, "Long live the road trip." And it had a picture of a bunch of 20-somethings having a great time on their road trip. Well, I don't know where their road trip was, probably to the gas station and back, because that's about as far as you want to drive with 4 or 5 people in a Toyota Yaris. That was not starting with the end in mind. If you're planning a road trip, you do not want to do that road trip in a tiny little car that can only seat about 2 people comfortably. So we got to make sure we have the same attitude when we're teaching online. We need to know what our goals are. We have to begin with the end in mind, and we need to understand what our students need to learn in our course. If we don't have a solid sense of what we want our students to get out of our course, then all the technology and all the apps and websites in the world aren't really going to help anything, because we don't have a clear sense of why we're teaching what we're teaching. And if we can't explain that to our students, and if we can't build our course around those goals, then we're starting off on the wrong foot, and it's going to be really difficult to recover. And this has nothing to do with technology either. A lot of people think that technology is synonymous with distance learning, and in some ways it is, but it's not the starting point for course design. We really need to know what our goals are for the course and then work backwards from there. And that dictates almost everything we do in our online course. Once we know what the end is, what the end result is, then we can start working backwards. What are my students going to learn in my class? What learning activities can I implement to help them learn those goals? And finally, how am I going to know if they've learned what I want them to learn? This is the foundation for basically all good course design. Even the corporate world, if you don't start with this mindset, then you're starting off on the wrong foot, and it's going to be very difficult to recover. If you can't clearly articulate what your students are going to need to learn in your course, and then you won't be able to develop learning activities that you can implement to help learn those goals, and you won't be able to develop assessments. We're actually dealing with this last one right now, particularly at OSU, as are probably all of you. Right now, a lot of instructors, as we're moving to online, or as we already have moved to online, a lot of instructors are trying to go about this from maybe the wrong mindset because they don't know any different. A lot of instructors are used to giving quizzes and tests in their course, especially with finals a couple weeks away. So we're getting questions in my support job at OSU that are like, how can I do my final exam online? How can I do lock it down so that students can't access any other websites and things like that? Well, maybe that's not the right mindset to have. Maybe this question here, how will I know if my students have learned what I want them to learn? Maybe that can be answered with something besides a test or a quiz or a final exam. Maybe there's some other way to assess your students that is better suited to an online environment especially given the constraints we're under right now. This also has kind of major implications in terms of technology. Teaching is more important than technology, especially when we teach online. And if we put technology first, then we're starting off the wrong foot again. Online courses inevitably use technology. It's the nature of the beast. But the focus should be on teaching and not technology. And it's important that we approach online instruction by asking the right questions. And some of these questions that people ask are, how can I replicate my face-to-face instruction? And you'll notice it has a strike through it, because that's not the right question to ask. What are some cool technologies that I can try? And again, that's not the right question to ask. All online courses should use discussion board. That's not correct. So we have this mistaken sense that because I'm using online platforms like Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle or something like that, I've got to use a bunch of technology. I've got to use synchronous video. I've got to use emojis. I've got to use Powtoon to make myself into a cartoon. I've got to use Twitter and Facebook, and it's not really the point. The point is we got to go back to, I'm going to go to the previous slide. What's my goal for the course? And then once you have that in mind, then start working backwards from there. What are my students going to need to learn in my course? What learning activities can I implement? And how will I know if they've learned what I want them to learn? So if not you, but if anyone is looking for the answer or to the question, how do we teach online? All starts with this slide here. You could just, this entire presentation could just be this one single slide. What are the goals for the course, and then work backwards from there. And we're going to talk about more than just this single slide, but it really does start with all this. And we've been dealing with this a lot as faculty members are thrust into this online learning environment. And we keep coming back to this. For the next couple weeks, what are the major things that your students are going to need to learn now that we're online? And faculty never signed up for this. Students didn't want this. They were making this transition unexpectedly. And so as we're helping faculty deal with this is what we tell them. What are your major goals for the next few weeks? And when we work backwards from those goals, it might look different than your face-to-face class, and you might not be able to replicate your face-to-face class, but we're going to get to those goals somehow. And people often ask us, well, what are some tools in Canvas that I can use? There's a lot, but, and we use Canvas at OSU. We used Desire to Learn / Brightspace for like 9 or 10 years. And now we're on Canvas. So there's a lot of tools you can use, but you don't want to start with that. And I've got a few slides on that later as well about what are some cool tools I can use. It's really all about the outcome of the class. With that said, I want to pause for just a second and see what questions you have thus far, questions, comments, things I'm forgetting as of this point in the presentation. So I'll give you just a second to type anything in the chat room, and then we'll continue on. I just want to thank everyone for being here as well. There was a lot of participants. I looked earlier, and it was upwards of 70 participants, and that was right before we started. So thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate it.
We are actually at 104 people in the room right now.
Oh my goodness, thank you. That's great to know. All right, so nothing's coming in yet, and that's fine. We'll just wait just a little longer because we have other things to get to. If no one has anything. Okay, what lecture delivery methods do you get positive responses from? So if you're asking me personally, I get the best responses from, that's actually a really good question, Cherry. So here's something I don't have in the PowerPoint, or maybe I do, but it's down on my notes here. So the best online lectures are short. We're talking 5 to 9 minutes. Don't go over 10 minutes. They are targeted. They also show the instructor's face. So if we're not doing those things, then our students are not likely to engage as much as they would otherwise. We get a lot of instructors who just want to put an entire hour lecture. I'm not kidding. Someone yesterday emailed in and they said, my video is having trouble processing when I upload it to Canvas. We investigated. It was a 3-hour lecture that they uploaded to Canvas. And that doesn't work. You can't expect your students to watch. I'm not even going to watch a 3-hour movie. I watched The Irishman on Netflix. That was a really good movie. It was like 3.5 hours long. I had to do it over several days just to watch that thing. And that's a Martin Scorsese movie. My professor is no Martin Scorsese. So the best delivery methods are short, 5 to 9 minutes. If you have a 10 or 20-minute lecture, break it up into shorter chunks. They are targeted in that they address specific topics as much as you can, and they also show the instructor. And that's really important. We get a lot of instructors who say, I'm just not comfortable showing my face. I don't think I look right. I don't think I sound right. Well, it's not about you. It's about your students. And what I like to tell people is when we show up for a lecture, like if there's a guest speaker coming to campus, or if you're just a student and you show up to a physical face-to-face class, if that instructor or that person at the front of the room is speaking from the hallway and they're speaking through a microphone and they're speaking and you can see their slides, but you don't get to see the person, you'd get up and leave. It's not engaging if you don't see the person. So when we record videos for online classes and we don't show ourselves, we're not letting our students connect with us in the same way that humans like to connect with other humans. On a psychological level, humans have a need to connect with other humans. And we're seeing that play out and all across the world right now as everyone shifts to online. And without that human connection, we don't engage with the content as much. So it's really important as much as possible for students to see their instructor. And the best online delivery videos show the instructor. Do you need to have the instructor's face visibly the entire time? I've used VidGrid. There's a delay between what I'm saying on screen and what I'm doing. In general, the more you can show yourself, the better. In fact, there's a lot of research that shows the more that we can engage in showing our personality, the better you're going to engage with it. Now, 5 minutes ago, I demonstrated this. Does anyone know how I demonstrated this principle of showing a little bit of our personality here in this webinar? Does anyone remember? Yes, Chris, that's right. So that was intentional on my part. Yes. So you don't know me. You don't know anything about me. You never met me, but you know that you attended a webinar today where the instructor paused and took a drink of Mountain Dew. And if you don't remember anything else in the webinar, you're probably going to remember that it was that one where the guy kept on pausing to drink Mountain Dew. Now we've made a personal connection. If you don't have that with your online instructor, you're not going to engage with the content as much as you would otherwise. So anytime we can add a little bit of self-disclosure and a little bit of our personality to it, it helps engage the audience a little more. I'm just scanning the chat. This is great, you guys. Thank you so much. These are really good comments coming in. Sherry says, I agree with short videos. You make short videos. Do you assign multiple videos? Do within 24-hour period. It all depends. A general best practice is for one, let's say you're doing a textbook and there's like 10 chapters in the textbook. Maybe you've got 5 or 10 videos per chapter. Give them a week to watch those and give them a quiz on Monday after those videos are all done. But I wouldn't give them just a 24-hour period. I would give them a little longer period than that. How do you best deal with students who are overwhelmed at the steep learning curve and they're overwhelmed with the technology? You know what I do, Thomas? And I'll see what other people have to say. I make a screen capture video at the beginning of the class. And well, even before class, I do it like a month before class starts. I pull up Canvas, I pull up a screen recorder, and I literally walk my students through my class. And I say, here's where you click on for your assignments. Here's where you click on for quizzes. To turn things in, go here. To check your grades, go here. And I help my students become familiar with this technology that we're all going to start using. And so Thomas says, how do you best deal with students who are overwhelmed with the steep learning curve? That's how I do it. My colleague Stacy, his solution, he often says, find the lowest tech solution and go with that. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. If we start with this outcome-oriented mindset, what are my goals for the course? Maybe the way my students get to those goals is not with 8 new apps and websites and technology tools. Maybe it's just something really simple. Just writing essays and turning those essays in or something, but it doesn't have to be fancy because it's about the teaching, not the technology. Mikey says, today I talked about my dogs while recording lectures. Mikey, I can almost promise you that your students are going to remember those lectures and remember that content better than if you had not talked about your dogs. Even better, Mikey, if in a future lecture you can show your dogs, students love it. And you probably know this already. I'm just guessing since you're a dog person. If you can ever bring in any artifacts from your personal life, that goes a long way with students, and it helps them instantly connect with the instructor and then engage more with the content. Scavenger hunts introduction videos. Yes, that's a good idea. And also, if you do a quiz at the beginning of the semester, so I like to start my students off with an A, and it's a trick I got from Mrs. Keister, my 7th grade social studies teacher. She likes to start everyone off on a really positive note. And the way I do that is I give them a syllabus quiz the first week of class. And it's the easiest A that they could ever get. It's open book, open note, open syllabus. And it's 10 questions about the syllabus. And by the end of that first week, they've got an A and they already know a few things about my course because it was in the syllabus quiz. So everyone's starting on a positive note there right off the bat. So that's one way to start things and really get things off on the right foot. This is great, you guys. I really like webinars where there's a lot of interaction and there's some really good comments coming in. Thank you so much. Keep those coming. I'll get to them as best I can as we continue the content here. We've already done this slide. I want to talk about course goals. And at this point, because of all the Q&A that's come in, we might end up repeating some things. And if I see that, I might just skip a slide or something. So let's say, here's some example course goals. And these are just sort of made up. My goal at the end of the semester, I want my students to understand the foundational elements of calculus. I want my students to know how aircraft propulsion systems work. I want my students to be able to model and predict the spread of infectious diseases, which would be particularly important right now. I want my students to perform a dramatic monologue. I want my students to demonstrate the effect of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO on photographs. All these are course goals. And once you have a solid understanding of what your goals are for your online course, then you can start to look at the LMS and look at tools you can use to accomplish those goals. The reason this is so important is, well, there's a lot of reasons, but every instructor is unique and it's impossible to say, here's what's going to work for you. When it might only work for one single person, but it probably won't work writ large for everyone involved. We start with our goals, we work backwards, and we start breaking those long-term goals into smaller, shorter-term goals. And then we start looking at what we can do to accomplish those in an online environment. It may involve a lot of technology, it might not. But if the goal here is to learn what works in online education, the seminar is called Introduction to Online Education, and find out some things that work. This is what works. Get your goals clear, know your goals, even go so far as write them out. Pull up a blank Microsoft Word document and say, start typing. At the end of my course, I want my students to, and then just start listing a couple goals. And then work backwards from there. Start investigating. Once you have these goals clear, start investigating what can the LMS do for you. What technologies can help you accomplish those goals. Don't start with the technology first. And I've got one last slide on this section here, prioritizing teaching over technology. There's a saying that I have in my office that I'm borrowing from my boss, Shane: good teaching is good teaching. It doesn't matter what the medium is, the same principles of good teaching often apply. People often often approach online education with the wrong mindset. They think that online teaching is all about technology, and that's not necessarily the case. Technology is a tool that facilitates learning. Technology is not the end unto itself. Technology is important, but your main focus should be on learning and course goals, not on using a specific piece of software or technology. There's no specific technologies needed except the LMS platform. If you use Moodle or Canvas or Blackboard, that is the one technology that is important that everyone uses, simply because that's how you deliver your instruction. Software, websites, and other things can be useful, but the priority should be on identifying course goals and then finding technology that can help you meet those goals. Next, we're going to transition to a bit of a different mindset. We're going to look at LMS tools that we can use. And these are going to, I'm trying to cast a wide net here because we don't all run the same learning management system. But I want to pause again just to check the chat room. Christiana says, I introduced my dogs as my IT support team and get them on camera. Good for you. That means so much to your students. And I don't know if it would be wise to survey your students on that. But my guess is that your students are going to remember you and remember your class because of that self-disclosure. Peter says, are your videos produced through Studio on Canvas? Peter, I'm not sure what videos you're referring to. Just like my class videos, just generally speaking, or there's a bunch of videos that I have, which you may or may not be referring to, Peter. I have a whole bunch of videos on Canvas that I've made for OSU. Those videos that I've made that are about Canvas were actually produced using Camtasia, which is a commercial software. It's like a couple $100. But I do produce a lot of videos right in Studio on Canvas. With that being said, I want to get to the next part, which is learning management system design. So let's talk about that for a second. If you could type in the chat room what your learning management platform is, it'll help us to kind of get oriented so we all know what we're using. We got Blackboard, Moodle, and Peter, the videos you use in class. Yeah, I use both Canvas Studio and Camtasia for my videos in class. Man, you guys are on the ball. This is awesome. Okay, Blackboard, Canvas. That's like the common ones here. It looks like we got Canvas, Blackboard, a couple Moodle users, a couple D2L users, Brightspace, Moodle, Blackboard, Blackboard Ultra. Okay. This is good to know. Genzavar. I don't know what that is, but I'm glad it's out there. Choice is always a good thing. So let's talk about LMS design here. The mechanics of course design, looks like I have one slide there it is. The mechanics of course design in online teaching involve the intentional use of learning management system to create an online course that's logical, easy to navigate, enhance the student experience. There's no test at the end of this webinar, so you don't need to memorize that. But if you want to learn about what should I do with my learning management system, how should I organize it? It all starts with course design. It all starts with course goals. It's not enough just to upload all your documents to the LMS, create a few exams, and call it a day. You have to be intentional about how you use your LMS. Because you're in this webinar, you are all probably on the forefront of a lot of this. You're probably the ones who are more the LMS power users, and you've investigated all the tools of your LMS, and you're always clicking on menus and finding out ways to do creative new things in your LMS. But that's not always the case. Some people would just rather log in and upload a bunch of stuff and call it a day. But the point here, regardless of your personal level of usage or comfort with the LMS, the point here is to use the tools that your LMS has to create your course intentionally so your students can spend less time searching and clicking and more time engaging with the content. And that's something that we often lose sight of that, especially if we're adopting a new LMS and schools switch over from one LMS to the other all the time. There's this tendency to rush into the LMS and start looking at what are all the cool menus and options and things that Canvas and Blackboard and Brightspace do. And when you look at these LMS platforms, this is what they show off. We spent like 2 years investigating. We went from Brightspace to Canvas. And so we had Blackboard come in and do a whole song and dance. We had Moodle, some people who are using Moodle, we had Canvas, and this is what they show off. Look at everything it does. It does videos, it does interactive quizzing, it does multimodal this and app-based that and all these things. And it's easy to get lost in that and start thinking, I'm gonna do all these cool things in my online class. You gotta slow it down and go back to your course goals. Organize your LMS, plan your usage of the LMS around your course goals. Before we start getting into all the different features the LMS has to offer, we really need a solid understanding of what are we trying to accomplish in our course. and then work backwards from there. And maybe we only use some really basic stuff in the LMS. That doesn't mean we have failed as online teachers. That means we've actually succeeded, because our student experience is going to be focused and easy to understand and well organized. And the way we present materials is going to be based around our course goals, not around which technology we think is really cool. Christiana says Camtasia made by TechSmith, and they're offering a free temp version of Snagit. Yes, I would advise taking advantage of that. In fact, I like Camtasia so much, I just bought my own copy. And here at home this week, these past couple weeks, my wife is also a professor at Oklahoma State University. She and I have both been using Camtasia a lot. The studio tool in Canvas is nice, but honestly, I find a lot of uses for Camtasia just in general, especially if I'm helping my in-laws with something. I can pull up Camtasia, do a screen recording. It's really easy. So I would definitely take advantage of that offer. TechSmith is offering Snagit, which is a great screen recording tool for free because of the coronavirus epidemic. Regina says, do I prefer Camtasia or Captivate? Yeah, I've only used Captivate a little bit. They're both solid tools. I'm not going to recommend one or the other. I personally like Camtasia, but it's kind of, in my opinion, it's a Ford, Chevy, Dodge situation and anyone could probably work just fine, as long as you find a tool that works for you. So when you approach your LMS, if you want a good online class, when you look at your LMS and how you present your content in the LMS, there's a lot of different ways, and you're all on Blackboard, Canvas, and Moodle, and D2L. So they share some common elements like modules or pages. These are pretty common across LMS platforms. No matter what, there's usually a content hierarchy. And there's ways to, on any given LMS, to chunk stuff up into a module and then have stuff in the module, or a page and have stuff in that page. Whatever you do, it's important to have a logical sense of organization and to trim unwanted features. Modules and pages, if you're using modules or pages or folders or whatever it's called in your particular LMS, they should reflect the sub-goals for your course. How should I build my class in Canvas? Start with your course goals, and then work backwards from there. Your modules, your pages, your containers for content need to be focused on those course goals. This might seem elementary, but a lot of people forget this step because we get so focused on all the cool features of our LMS and that we end up with an online class that's just bloated with stuff. And our students log in and they're overwhelmed with all of these different things that they're supposed to click on. Meanwhile, the instructor's using Flipgrid and Powtoon and Twitter and Facebook and all that, but the students are just lost because they don't understand how it's all organized. You gotta pay attention to your course goals and work backwards from there and build your LMS around your goals and outcomes for the course. If you can even go so far as embedding content into modules and pages. So, for instance, in Canvas, I think Blackboard and Brightspace do this too. If you have quizzes in your class, instead of making your students click over here on the menu on the side that says quizzes, take every quiz and embed it in the module that it goes in. Take every discussion board. Instead of making your students click on these various discussion boards, put your discussion for Chapter 2 in the Chapter 2 module. Make sure your online course is as streamlined as possible so that it's as easy for your students to get in, get what they need in a logical, orderly fashion, understand how it all relates to the course goals, and then move on to the next thing in your course. Not all online courses have this sense of organization and this hierarchy and structure. And if we don't do that, then we're going to end up with an online course that is in some ways a deterrent to learning because we're bogging it down with all this stuff that doesn't necessarily need to be there. As far as LMS tools, using the LMS can almost be like going to a hardware store. There's so many tools at the hardware store that it's fun to go around and look around and window shop. I like to go to Lowe's. I live about a mile from Lowe's. And sometimes I'll just go to Lowe's and wander around. I'll look at all these things, like a bandsaw, that'd be awesome. A planer, how cool would that be? Shop vacs and dryer vents and all these things. There's actually a Weird Al song called Hardware Store. I think it's from his album Poodle Hat, or maybe Running with Scissors. And I feel like that song was written for me almost, because it's easy to go to a hardware store and just look around at all this stuff. We often approach LMS platforms with that same mindset. There's so many tools in our LMS that we get lost in that. And you don't want to go and just buy a bunch of stuff at the hardware store without knowing what you're going to use it for. The same is true for a learning management system. You might have video recording, announcements, news, files, modules, pages, video conferencing, internal communication. That's great. It's good to have that stuff. But don't just start using these things because you think it's to be fun to have. Use them intentionally. Make sure you communicate a purpose to using these for your students, so they know if you're using Twitter, you have a clear purpose for using Twitter, not just because you think it'd be cool to use Twitter in your online course. I'm going to pause for just a second. Our next section is on engaging students. I really like this next section here. I'm curious what you have to hear about that. It's not a long section, but it's a fun section to cover. I'm gonna take another caffeinated pause here and check the chat room. A lot of good discussion about Captivate versus Camtasia. Christiana says the people at TechSmith are amazing. Much smaller company, so much more responsive than Adobe. Yeah, I would agree. Camtasia is a solid product. I really do, I recommend it. If you really want good screen recording, Camtasia is a solid option. But again, I'm not going to say don't use another program. I've just had a lot of good experience with Camtasia. And I'm a Mac guy. I've used Final Cut for years. I used Final Cut since before it was Final Cut Pro X. I've been using Final Cut for a long time. I use Adobe Premiere. I use a lot of programs. Camtasia just gets the job done for screen recording really, really well. But Captivate probably works really well too. Someone said, Regina says, I'm kind of mad at Adobe right now since they haven't been as nice about sharing software. Yeah, that's true. I would recommend giving Camtasia first. And I pay Adobe. I'm a member of their Creative Cloud Photography plan. So I use whatever software I can, but for screen recording, Camtasia is just awesome. Let's talk about engaging students. When we think of an online class, there's a lot of things that we can do to engage students. Attrition in online courses is a major issue, and I think we would all agree on that. We often see this curve where, can you all see my video? I don't know, is my video showing? So I'm making like hand movements over here. I don't know if you can all see those my hand waving and stuff. Okay, good. So Regina says, yes, you can see my video. Awesome. Good. Yeah, what a responsive group. Thank you. This is like one of my favorite webinars I've ever done. We often see this curve where here's the beginning of the semester, here's the end, and engagement is like this, and then it just sort of drops off. And by the end, it's just like this trickle of students doing the bare minimum, if that. That happens in a lot of courses, but it's especially true in online courses. Attrition is a major issue, and student engagement often falls off after the first couple of weeks. There is not one simple trick you can do to automatically increase engagement. There are some practices you can put in place, but a lot of it starts with, if I was in person, I would say engaging students all starts with what? And the answer, since we're just doing this on webinar, is course design. If we don't have a clear, focused sense of what we want our students to get out of our course, then we're not going to have as engaged of a student population as we otherwise would. So we have to make sure that we have a clear sense of what we want our students to do in our course. When they log in, do they understand why they're here? And do they understand why we're doing the work each week? If they see that the work we do each week is relevant to their education and that they're not just doing a bunch of busy work for the sake of busy work, they're more likely to engage with the content. Make sure you clearly state your course goals for the course and design activities for the course that align with those course goals. Your students shouldn't be able to say, why in the world are we doing this? And it seems kind of obvious. If anyone has ever taught the primary levels, so I used to teach at a K through 12 school up in Minnesota, and for a couple of years I taught, it was either 7th or 8th grade English, and more than a couple times I was teaching a grammar lesson, and students, because they're 7th and 8th grade, question what you do. And I had several students who say, Mr. Ringsmuth, why are we learning about sentence diagramming and all these things? And I had to have a clear answer for them, because that was how they bought into it. If I for a little while, I tried the answer, because I'm your teacher and I said so. Now open the book. Well, that doesn't work very long. But if I can explain clearly why this is important, students are more likely to engage with content, and that happens online. If you teach an online class, make a video, a screen capture video like this, or even just a webcam video. In the first week of class, welcome your students to class, tell them you're glad they're here, and explain why you're doing what you're doing. Help them to understand that there is a purpose to everything you're doing in the course. Pull up your Canvas and your screen capture video, and just 5 minutes long, it's all it takes. Just walk them through and say, when we get to this is what we're going to use, and here's why. And when we get to this part, this is what we're going to do, and here's why we're doing it. I'm really excited to have you all here. I'm really glad you're here. And make sure that your students are primed at the beginning of the semester to really engage richly with your course by how the course is designed. Your students, if there's a sense of purpose for your course, it generally leads to a greater sense of engagement. And it's also important to do some basic things to engage your students. I'm going to cover a couple of those things that you can do to engage your students in this slide. But someone put a lot of text in the chat room. Susan did. I read something in Teachers COVID-19 chat room. They said something that shocked me at first. They said, plan on doing the online course badly. I was horrified at first, but they explained, if you try to make an award-winning online course in the middle of the semester, you're going to go insane and you won't deliver videos and so forth on time to your students. Yeah, I would agree with that. I started taking a much more low-tech approach, lo-fi approach. This office is my wife's home office. This is where I've been recording my videos now, a poorly lit home office that was not designed for this. But we just got to get that content out. And if we focus on meticulously editing every little thing and and making everything do 5 or 10 takes because we want it perfect, it's not going to work. We got to focus on content first. Jim says, you said engage with content. What about engaging with the other students as they all engage in the content? So Jim, you must have had the cheat sheet here, because that's what I'm going to talk about in this slide. Thank you, Jim. That's a great segue. Jim, if you were here, I'd give you a free Mountain Dew just for that. So stop by my office if you're ever in town, and I'll give you a free one. Well done, Jim. By the way, thank you to whoever knew the answer to the Weird Al trivia. Someone said it was Poodle Hat. Awesome. Great album. That was Jay Edwards. Thank you, Jay. So let's talk about engaging students. Some things you can do to engage your students in your online class. You got your course design. You got your course objectives clearly stated. You've got your LMS. You've organized LMS. So what can you do to engage your students and keep them coming back throughout the semester? I'll tell you what you can do. You can stay active and involved. The instructor. You know, we often look at online education and we kind of blame the students when it doesn't work. And we look at that curve where we say online education at the beginning of the semester, engagement's up here, and then it kind of drops off. Well, if we're being honest with ourselves, how often does instructor engagement drop off? In that first week or two, we're all active and involved, and we're like answering emails, we're posting videos, but boy, by that third week, gosh, you know, my kids need a lot of attention, and got the plumber coming over, and I just don't have time to grade all these assignments, and you know, I said I'd respond to your email within 2 days, but I got a lot of stuff going on. If we're honest with ourselves, we as instructors have a tendency to become disengaged and follow the same curve, just like our students. Not all of us, but generally speaking, this is what we see. So we look at students and we say, well, those students are just dropping off. Why? How come they're not, these lazy millennials or zennial, whatever they're called these days, they're just not engaging with my course. Well, we need to look at ourselves too and ask ourselves, are we doing everything to stay active and involved? Students take their cues from their instructor. If they see that the course is not a priority for the instructor, that the instructor isn't engaged, the students are not going to be engaged. Now, it doesn't mean that an engaged instructor will automatically have engaged students, but without instructor engagement, students are likely to without instructor engagement, students are less likely to engage with the course. That doesn't mean that with instructors engagement, students will automatically be more active, but it does help. So you as the instructor need to stay active and involved. Communicate regularly. If you want just a simple solution to online teaching, I don't have it, but I can tell you something that works. At least once a week, maybe even twice a week, do a video update to your students. It doesn't have to be fancy, but just pull out your phone, record a quick video, and post it to your class news or whatever LMS platform you're using. On Canvas, we have an announcements platform. But once, preferably twice a week, my recommendation is Monday and Thursday. Record a video, 2-3 minutes long. Use notes like I'm doing here. If you're on video, you keep seeing me looking down at my notes, and that's fine. But send your students a message by your actions that you are involved in the course and that the course is a priority for you. A video update once or twice a week is a great way to do that, to let your students know that you are still part of this course. Also, communicate via email, communicate via internal messaging, communicate via feedback on your students' assignments, communicate regularly with your students. If you have a discussion board, be part of that discussion board with your students. You know, anyone who's used a discussion board in an online class knows what I'm talking about when I say that engagement drops off. And students, over time, they learn to max out the minimum. And if the instructor says, I require 1 response by Tuesday at midnight, another 2 responses by Thursday at 5 p.m., and they have to be 220 words long, then students will do exactly that and no more. But oftentimes, students don't get the sense that what they're talking about really matters. And they come to an online discussion, and they're typing because the professor says they have to type, but it feels like the words are going into the ether with no consequence. And when their fellow compatriots in class are replying, it feels like it's just typing for the sake of typing. But when the instructor becomes a part of that discussion board, suddenly the words take on meaning. And if I'm typing my response to the discussion board, and lo and behold, the professor responds to me at some point, my engagement meter just went from here up to here. And it's probably even off the charts over here for that particular week, because my words now matter to the instructor who noticed what I said and responded in kind, or even asked me a question to clarify it. If you have a huge class, then you don't need to respond to every single person, and you don't need to do it all the time throughout the semester. But if you can send your students the implicit message by your actions that the course matters to you, and that let's say the discussion board matters to you, then they are more likely to engage. One way you can do this also on a discussion board, at the end of the week, or maybe twice during the week, pop in the discussion board and offer a summary. Hey everyone, I've really enjoyed the discussion this week. This is my typing, if you can't see that, I'm fake typing here. I really enjoyed the discussion week. A lot of good things being said about this, some questions about this. Let me address a couple of those questions. And by the way, thank you to those of you who showed pictures of your puppies in your discussion board posts. Now we have taken the level of discourse in our discussion board and the level of personal relevance. We brought it from here all the way up here. It's not it's not Snapchat, it's not Twitter, it's not Facebook, it's not a social network. It's still a class discussion board, but we have made it a lot more engaging to our students by what we have done through our actions to make it more engaging. Hold online office hours regularly via chat or video conference. Find a way to have an open forum to connect with your students and let them connect with each other in class. Use inbox announcements. This is what it's called in Canvas. There's an internal messaging system in Canvas called Inbox. In Blackboard and in D2L, Brightspace is called something else. But use these tools. My general recommendation is to stay away from Outlook when you communicate with your students, because those messages can get lost. But if I'm in Canvas and I send a message to another student, one of my students in Canvas, I can be reasonably certain that that message is not going to get lost in a junk mail filter, like if it is if I send them an email in Outlook. Set up online discussion forums and require students to respond with text or video, and make that an option. Canvas has a little button that you can click on to add a video. and I think Blackboard, and I think even Brightspace might do this too, incorporate that into the discussion, or maybe give students bonus points. If they're asking for extra credit, tell them, all right, you can have 10 extra bonus points if you respond with a video for your discussion at least twice during the semester, something like that. And it's going to force those students to come out of their shell a little bit and engage a little bit more deeply. I'm going to check the chat room here. A lot of good comments coming in again. I'm just going to kind of scan. You guys can all read those comments, so I don't want to repeat what's already been said and looked at here. A lot of good comments about discussion board. Introduce yourself. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Encourage them to share. And I would also continue to revisit that as the instructor throughout the semester. Susan, you might see a lot of engagement on that for a week or two, but by week 9 or 10, that's probably going to drop off. And that's just the nature of the beast. So find a way to stay active and involved with that as an instructor, and encourage students continually to come back to that. Your tech support can help you find evidence in your LMS, not your inbox. Yeah, that's right. LMS, if you keep these communications through your LMS, then there's always this permanent record. And Outlook messages can end up getting deleted and lost. So I like to keep student communication within Outlook. Here's another tool that you can use to keep students engaged, though, and this kills a couple birds with one stone here. Testing and assessment. We often don't think of testing and assessment as something that we can do to keep students engaged. It's almost like a punishment to use tests in our class. Well, not necessarily. Sorry, I glanced over the chat, and no, in fact, Regina says, no, I don't think anyone sent a message just to me.
Just to clarify on that, Simon.
Yeah, sure.
To communicate with the panelists and the attendees in the audience, you must select that in the chat dialog box. So if you select all panelists, it will only go to Simon and myself. Just to clarify or get back.
Is that what's happening? Oh, okay.
I did see another question up there that I think would be worth answering real quick, if that's okay, Simon.
Yeah, go ahead.
Luann commented that she may have a situation with engaging students now that all courses have moved online, teaching remedial reading and writing students in face-to-face earlier this semester. Many of them now don't have computers or internet, so they're struggling to complete those assignments. Maybe beyond the scope of the session, but I know that that's a concern many people on this call probably share.
Yeah. And we're seeing that with a lot, like my son's I have a son in kindergarten and a son in 3rd grade, and they're all online. And a lot of students a lot of schools are discovering that students just don't have all the technology that we think they have. So we have to be careful what we do. And if I go back to my comment at the beginning of the webinar about finding the lowest tech solution and using that, there's a lot to be said for that right now, especially when we're dealing with an internet access issue and a technology access issue that we didn't have before. And now we can't require a lot of high-tech things when we don't know that students even have access to that. Thank you, by the way. It looks like some of these comments are now going to all panelists and attendees. Thank you so much. This whole time, I thought they were going to everyone in the whole chat. So everyone in the whole webinar.
You're doing such a good job keeping up with the questions.
I hope so. So I want to talk about testing assessment here, and Brad, we're over at 1. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. So let me talk about testing. Quizzes and tests can also be used to build an engaging online class. If you want your students to come back regularly, give them a reason to come back regularly. And frequent low-stakes quizzes are a great way to do this. In fact, frequent low-stakes quizzes are typically better in general than one larger exam. We have a lot of instructors right now saying, well, how do I do a midterm? How do I do a final online? And if we go back to course design, why are we doing a midterm and a final? Is there a rule that says we have to give a midterm and a final? Maybe there is a rule that we have to have some sort of final assessment or final or midterm assessment, but it doesn't always have to be a quiz or a test. Maybe there's another way we can assess student learning without giving them a test. In fact, if we want to make sure our students are learning what we want them to use, then frequent quizzes, and I mean every week, give your students a quiz. Make them low stakes. collectively, all these quizzes are worth 10% of their grade, so it's not a big deal. But we've now given them, by doing frequent low stakes quizzes, we've given them an incentive to come back to Canvas or Blackboard or wherever the online class is. We've given them something that is really easy, because it's just like a 20-minute, 30-question multiple choice quiz. So the stress level is low. The incentive to cheat is low. In fact, we can even give them multiple attempts just to lower that stress level. You're going to find that if you give students low stakes quizzes frequently, the grades on these are almost always going to be on this curve where you have a couple that are really high scoring. Most of the grades are going to be about in the A, B to C range. And it's going to be the same curve that we would see on a normal class, because most of our students just want to come in, do the work. They don't want to cheat, but they feel like they have to cheat if the stakes are so high. It's a midterm, it's a final. If I don't do this, I don't pass the class. Now I have a reason to cheat a little bit. But if it's a frequent low stakes quiz, if I know that every Thursday night I've got a quiz, my incentive to cheat is pretty low, because the quiz itself isn't even worth that many points. Try it in your online class. It's a great way to make sure students are able to recall the information that you teach them. If you teach them something on Monday or Tuesday, they recall it on Thursday, they're going to be more likely to recall it, and they're more likely to cement that in long-term memory, which is what a lot of research demonstrates, if they're quizzed on it, if they're asked to recall it sooner rather than waiting to a midterm or final. So if we want a successful online class that engages students, use quizzes as a tool to do that, to give students a reason to come back to the class frequently. Make them timed, make them randomized questions, show one question at a time. If you really need to, you could use ProctorU, Examity, one of these proctoring services. I wouldn't recommend Respondus in an online class, because students can just use another computer. Respondus has a purpose, but it's best used in an online or in a physical proctored location. ProctorU and Examity, you can't add those during the semester because they cost money. Honestly, I would just delete all of these bottom ones here and focus on frequent low stakes quizzes as an assessment tool. And then for the midterm or the final, think of other ways that you can assess your students besides just give them a test. There might be a lot of other creative things you can do. Can exams be done in parts? Yeah, definitely. You can do a 4-part exam. I hope we get the 5 components of online instruction. I tell you what, Roy, the 5 key components, Brad, do you have a way of emailing stuff to all the attendees?
Yes, Simon, we can actually stay on a little bit longer.
Okay.
Recording will be posted to the onlineexcellence.onenet.net website for those of us that need to hop off. But yes, okay, we can certainly stay on a little bit longer, and I do see some questions coming in.
Let me give you the 5 key components real quick here. Since you stayed on this long, let me get you those. And I'll email Brad a document, a PDF that he can send out to all of you. Here are the 5 things. No matter what you teach, no matter who what size your class is, here's 5 things you can do to make your class as good as it can be. Number 1, communicate with your students. We've already talked about this. Online instructors tend to communicate less. Students say communication is very, very important. When you survey online students, this is usually the number 1 or 2 thing that they say. They really want their instructors to communicate. So communicate with your students. We've already talked about some ways to communicate. Make sure you're communicating. Post regular news updates, email reminders, webcam videos. These things are so powerful. They raise the level of your class. Video chats, discussion board, all of these ways of communicating are important in an online class. We often communicate naturally in a face-to-face class just because we have to show up and we got to talk to students, but we forget that in online class, that communication is just as important. And it's easy to blame it on the students. My students, they're dropping off. I'm only getting like 10% of them logging in. Well, yeah, but you're the instructor. Are you communicating with your students? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe there's more you could do to communicate with your students and let them know that they're important to you, that your class is important to you, and that you really have things going on that you need to let them know about. The second key component, expectations. This is something we don't always think about in the online class. Do your students know how to get to your class? Do they know the location of the online classroom? Do they know what you expect in terms of participation in an online classroom? We tell our students, I expect you to participate. Well, what does that mean? My last class, last semester, participation meant discussion board posts. Before that, participation meant log on to Twitter for some reason. Now, in my class, participation looks like this. We have to communicate our expectations to our students so that they know what we expect in terms of these things. What about creating assignments? What technologies do my students need? Microsoft Word, Google Docs, some other software program? It's not enough just to say, turn in a PDF. Well, how to make a PDF? You might say, well, everyone knows how to make a PDF. Not necessarily. There's some students who might not know how to make a PDF. So if we have them do different things for their assignments, how are we communicating those expectations to our students? It's amazing how many students after the first week or 2 weeks of an online class are just confused. And it seems like everyone else is already doing stuff and they can't even figure out how to download the app that they need because they have an Android phone and then the professor uses an iPhone. Has the instructor really communicated the expectations? Working in groups, what does that look like in online class? What about studying for and taking exams? What about the students and what they can expect of you? So a lot of people in terms of expectations do these top things. All right, that's something that we often do naturally. And we have a syllabus that says, in this class, I expect you to log in, I expect you to do this and this and this and this. But do we have a section that says, all right, students, here's what you can expect of me. I'm going to make this class a priority. I'm going to respond to your emails within 24 hours. I'm going to log into discussion board. I'm going to give you actionable feedback on your documents. Have we really held ourselves to the same standard that we are holding our students to? And if not, maybe we can find a way to do that, because online classes students don't always know what to expect of their instructor. Also, here's a key component. This is number 3, consistency. This is big. I have called out online instructors a couple points in this lecture, and I'm going to do that again because instructors in online classes have to be consistent. Are we doing what we say we will do? Or are we letting our own participation in our online classes go from here kind of down to here because we got bills to pay, we got other things going on, and you know what, I just got a bunch of stuff going on. My students had better be logging in, but me, I just got a lot of other stuff going on. My research, my other classes. Are we really doing what we're going to say we will do? Are we recording news updates when we say we're going to record them? Am I posting grades when I say I'm going to post them? If I tell my students something, I have to make sure I'm willing to do what I've told my students I'm going to do. Answering messages, discussions. The phrase I like to use here is under promise, over deliver. If you know that you're going to respond to emails within 24 hours, tell your students 48 hours. That way, every time you respond within 24 hours, you've just beat their expectations and they think you're awesome. And if you can't make it within 24 hours, you have set expectations to be 48 hours. So you're still maintaining that level of consistency. 2 more things. Organization. We've talked about this, so I don't want to belabor it too much. We need to make sure that our online students understand how our class is organized. And we can do that by posting screenshots, making a short video tutorial. There's a lot of things we can do to make sure our online classes are organized and that our students understand that sense of organization. The final key component of an online class that often gets forgotten is relationships. Over the course of this one webinar, I hope we have developed a good working relationship. You know that I like Mountain Dew. You know that I'm running around waving my hands like this. Hopefully, I've communicated a sense of my personality to you during this webinar. In an online class, instructors often forget about this part. We do this naturally in face-to-face classes, where we show up and we have students comment on students notice our clothes. They notice if we're always wearing a hat. They notice if we have a certain personality tick. But in an online class, we like to strip all that out because we got to be serious and professional, and we got to communicate important things to our students. Well, it's important to show our personality because students connect with the instructor to engage with the content. How can we connect with our students? How can we show our personality? You guys had some really good things about sharing with information about your pets and your families, and that's great. Create ways for your students to share their personality. Maybe virtual office hours are a way to do it. Maybe webcam videos, regular news updates, discussion boards. The point here is that students thrive on personal interactions. They occur naturally in face-to-face classes, but they have to be intentional in an online class, and we forget about that sometimes. So no matter how big your online class is, no matter what subject you teach, find a way to build a sense of personality, of professional relationship with your students in that class. That about does it for this presentation. I want to thank you all for attending. I have a PDF I can send out to Brad to send to you for the 5 key components if you're interested. I feel like we've covered a lot today, but in some ways it feels like we're only scratching the surface. So I thank you all for being here. And if you have any questions, send me an email. I'm going to set expectations. I'm slow to respond to email these days because my wife and I are both working from home, and we got our kids at home who are not at school. So my email, there's a backlog. So if you email me, I might not get back for a couple of days, but I will get back to you. I appreciate all the comments in chat, and apparently now I know next time I do a Zoom webinar to tell people at the beginning, send messages to the entire all attendees, not just the panelists.
We're all learning together, Simon.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I'm learning here too. Thank you. A lot of good comments in the chat. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Brad. And yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this, Brad.
Yeah, Simon, thank you so much. You know, as a person who also teaches online courses, I can tell you that everything that you have recommended in this session is something that I've had to learn by trial and error. So you are really saving a lot of time and frustration, not only for the faculty that are on this session, but for the students that are in their classes as well. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us.
Very welcome.
We'll make sure to post all the resources that we have on the Online Excellence website. The Zoom recording should be up by the end of business today. And if you are still interested in this topic, particularly on the notion of engaging students virtually, please look for the session that's occurring on Monday with Professor Akram Tagavi-Burris, who's a faculty member in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Tulsa. So again, Simon, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everybody stays safe and has a great rest of your week.
You're very welcome. Thank you all.